A Wisconsin woman serving a life sentence for killing and dismembering her boyfriend will go on trial again this fall. Taylor Schabusiness has pleaded not guilty to charges of battery by a prisoner for allegedly attacking a nurse and an officer at a correctional facility where she was being housed while awaiting trial in 2023. She's also being charged as a repeat offender. The 27-year-old had public outbursts of violence as well, famously attacking her then-attorney during a court hearing in February of 2023. Reports say during her most recent court appearance, she was restrained and heavily guarded. She was also issued a warning by the judge to behave. Her trial was set for October 27th and is expected to last 3 days. Schabusiness was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in September 2023 for killing and decapitating her boyfriend in 2022. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Mara Montalbano.
A bucket sat in the corner of the basement, covered with a towel. Tara Pakanich had come downstairs looking for her son. It was early morning on February 2022, and she had heard the door shut. She thought maybe Shad had left with Taylor, the woman he'd been seeing, the woman who had been down in that basement with him all night. But something made her lift the towel. What she found beneath it would make the 911 call one of the most disturbing in Green Bay history. The dispatcher asked if she was hallucinating. She wasn't. The trial that followed would shock Wisconsin, not just because of what Taylor Schabusiness did to Shad Thirian's body, not just because she admitted to enjoying it, but because it forced a courtroom to confront a question that has no easy answer. Where does drug-fueled madness end and true mental illness begin? And does it even matter when the result is the same? Schabusiness claimed she loved Shad Thirian. She also claimed she couldn't stop choking him. She told detectives she wanted to see what would happen. She asked them if they knew what it was like to love something so much you kill it. But before the confession, before the body parts scattered through the basement and stuffed into a crock-pot box in her minivan, before she told a forensic psychologist she had a thing with Jeffrey Dahmer, there was a young woman growing up in Wisconsin. A woman whose mental health records would become evidence. A woman who, by age 24, had already been convicted of fleeing police and was wearing a GPS ankle monitor she had removed. And there was a young man named Shad Thirian, 25 years old, a son, a friend, someone who, two people bound together by addiction and something far darker. This is the story of the Green Bay basement murder. If this is your first time here, this channel covers the most complex cases in criminal history. We go deeper than the headlines. We tell the full story from beginning to end. If that's something you're interested in, consider subscribing to No Way Out and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. On November 23, 1997, in the city of Chicago, Illinois, Marla and Arturo Coronado welcomed their daughter into the world. They named her Taylor Denise Coronado. The family lived in a modest neighborhood, and by all accounts, the early years of Taylor's life appeared ordinary. Her father worked to support the family, and her mother stayed home to raise Taylor and her younger brother, Arturo Jr., who everyone called AJ. Those who knew the young Taylor described her as a normal girl. She played volleyball and showed interest in typical activities for someone her age. The family attended local events and maintained relationships with extended relatives, including Taylor's paternal grandparents, Juan and Esther Coronado, who lived in Cotulla, Texas. Her maternal grandparents, Randall Flug and Patty Flug Williams, were also part of her life during these formative years. When Taylor was in 4th grade, the Coronado family made a significant move from Chicago to Green Bay, Wisconsin. This relocation would place Taylor in an entirely new environment. She enrolled in local public schools and began adapting to life in this smaller Wisconsin city, known more for its football team than for major crime. The move seemed like a fresh start for the family. But underneath the surface, problems were already developing. Taylor's mother, Marla, struggled with alcohol dependency. The addiction had taken hold gradually over the years, and by the time the family settled in Wisconsin, it had become a serious issue. Marla's drinking affected the household in ways that would not become fully apparent until years later, when Taylor herself would recount these experiences to mental health professionals. Taylor attended elementary school in Green Bay and appeared to adjust to her new surroundings. She made friends and participated in school activities. Teachers noted nothing particularly alarming about her behavior during these early years. She was simply another student navigating the challenges of growing up and the transition to a new community. The Coronado household maintained its routines despite Marla's struggles. Arturo worked to provide for his wife and 2 family members. Taylor and AJ grew up together in Green Bay, forming the bond that siblings often share when facing household difficulties. They relied on each other as their mother's condition worsened with each passing year. By 2009, Taylor had reached the age of 11. She was approaching middle school and all the changes that come with adolescence. Her brother AJ was younger, still in elementary school, looking up to his older sister. The family continued their daily lives in Green Bay, unaware that a devastating loss was about to shatter everything Taylor knew about stability and family. On May 20th, 2009, Marla Flugge Coronado passed away suddenly at her residence. She was only 41 years old. The cause was cirrhosis of the liver, a direct result of her years of alcoholism. Taylor, just 11 years old, lost her mother without warning. The woman who had raised her, despite all her flaws and struggles, was gone. After Marla's passing, 11-year-old Taylor faced a home that would never be the same. Her father Arturo was now a single parent, left to raise 2 family members while grieving his wife. The household that had already been strained by addiction now carried the weight of profound loss. Taylor watched as everything she knew about family crumbled around her. Within a relatively short time, Arturo Coronado remarried. His new wife brought 3 of her own into the household. For Taylor, this meant sharing her father with an entirely new family. The adjustment proved difficult. Taylor felt abandoned by her father. She believed she was losing him to these newcomers, these strangers who had suddenly become her step-siblings. The living situation deteriorated. Taylor and her brother AJ found themselves relegated to the basement of their own home. From a nice house where they had been raised by both parents, they were now living in a basement while their stepmother and her family occupied the main living spaces. This arrangement created deep resentment in Taylor, a feeling of being unwanted in her own family. By 7th grade, Taylor's behavioral problems had become serious enough that she was referred for mental health treatment. School officials documented attention and concentration problems. She struggled to focus on her studies and began acting out in class. Medical professionals diagnosed her with symptoms they believed stemmed from ADD or ADHD, and she was placed on medication to address these issues. The prescription medications expanded over time. In addition to the ADHD medication, Taylor was prescribed a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant, and an antipsychotic. At such a young age, she was already managing a complex medication regimen. These prescriptions would continue through her teenage years, though her compliance with taking them would become increasingly inconsistent. Taylor attended Bayport High School in Green Bay. It was there that she first met a boy named Shad Thirian. They were classmates, born just 2 months apart in 1997. Their paths crossed in the hallways and classrooms of the school, and eventually they began dating. For about 2 years, Taylor and Shad were a couple. High school sweethearts in a Wisconsin town, their relationship seemed typical for teenagers their age. But Taylor's problems followed her into high school. Her behavior grew more volatile, and the conflicts with other students escalated. Eventually, she was expelled from Bayport High School for fighting with another student. The expulsion represented a turning point. She could no longer remain in her father's home, and arrangements were made for her to live elsewhere. Taylor moved to Cotulla, Texas, to live with her paternal grandparents, Juan and Esther Coronado. In this small Texas town, far from Wisconsin and far from her father, she completed her schooling. She was separated from AJ, separated from the few friends she had made, and separated from Shad Thirian. The distance seemed to offer a chance at stability, but the damage had already been done. During her time in Texas, Taylor turned 18. At that age, she made the decision to wean herself off all the psychiatric medications she had been taking since 7th grade. Without medical supervision, she stopped taking the mood stabilizers, the antidepressants, and the antipsychotics. She believed she no longer needed them. This decision would have consequences that no one could yet foresee. Eventually, Taylor returned to Wisconsin to live with her father, but the household had not improved. The relationship with her stepmother remained strained. Meanwhile, her father Arturo was developing problems of his own. By the time Taylor reached her early 20s, her life had taken a troubling direction. The mental health issues that had been identified in 7th grade remained unaddressed. Without her medications, the symptoms that doctors had tried to treat continued unchecked. She was diagnosed at various points with severe depression, PTSD, and what some professionals believed was bipolar disorder. Taylor also began using drugs. By 18, she had started with marijuana and cocaine, but it was methamphetamine that would eventually dominate her life. The drug took hold gradually, and by her early 20s, Taylor was using meth up to 10 times a day. The addiction consumed her, altering her behavior and accelerating her mental deterioration. Around 2017, Taylor met a man named Warren Schabusiness. Warren was older than Taylor and had an extensive criminal history in Wisconsin. He had convictions for armed burglary, theft, disorderly conduct with a domestic abuse modifier, resisting an officer, and marijuana distribution. He was deeply involved in the methamphetamine trade, both using and selling the substance. Taylor was drawn to Warren despite his criminal background. Perhaps she saw something of herself in him, or perhaps she was simply attracted to the lifestyle he represented. According to what Taylor later told forensic psychologist Diane Litton, Warren introduced her to methamphetamine. Warren created the name Schabusiness as a play on his real surname, Schabusiness. The name represented what they called their empire, a term Warren used to describe their bond and lifestyle. They adopted the phrase the Schabusiness way to describe their approach to life, a mixture of loyalty, defiance, and disregard for conventional society. Taylor legally changed her name from Taylor Coronado to Taylor Schabusiness in 2018. She embraced the identity completely, leaving behind the name her parents had given her. The transformation from the volleyball-playing girl in Chicago to Taylor Schabusiness was now complete in name. She had found someone who accepted her troubled nature and offered her a sense of belonging, even if that belonging was rooted in substance abuse and criminal behavior. On Valentine's Day 2020, Taylor and Warren made their relationship official. They married at a courthouse in a simple ceremony. Warren had Taylor's name tattooed on his neck, a permanent display of his devotion. Taylor, in turn, posted on social media about her commitment to the marriage. But the marriage was troubled from the start. Warren's involvement in methamphetamine distribution caught up with him. He conspired with others to distribute more than 500 grams of methamphetamine. He was caught with 46 grams of the substance and eventually convicted on federal drug charges. Warren was sent to a federal detention center, leaving Taylor alone with her addiction and her demons. Taylor's first felony arrest occurred on June 21, 2020, just months after her marriage. Her legal troubles had begun after meeting Warren, a pattern that suggested his influence had accelerated her downward spiral. Whatever stability she might have found was now gone. Her husband was in federal prison, and she was left to navigate her addiction without him. In 2021, Taylor gave birth to a son named Mateo Coronado. The infant was born while Warren was serving his federal sentence. Taylor was in no condition to care for an infant. Her substance addiction, mental health issues, and unstable living situation made parenting impossible. Mateo was placed with Warren's parents in Texas, the same state where Taylor had once lived with her own grandparents. The cycle of family separation continued into another generation. That same year, Taylor was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. The hospitalization occurred in April and May of 2021. During this time, medical professionals diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and confirmed the bipolar disorder that previous doctors had suspected. She was placed on new medications, but her compliance with treatment remained questionable. In July 2021, tragedy struck the Coronado family again. Taylor's brother AJ, the boy who had lived with her in that basement, who had shared the trauma of losing their mother, was fatally injured in a motorcycle accident. He was only 22 years old. Taylor had now lost both her mother and her only sibling. The grief compounded the existing mental health struggles that she had never properly addressed. Taylor's behavior grew increasingly erratic. In June 2020, police were called to a Green Bay neighborhood for a woman who appeared to be under the influence of narcotics. She was knocking on doors and wandering in the street. When officers found Taylor, she told them she was not sure what was happening, and that she was on a different planet right now. She showed them the fresh track marks on her arms. When police tried to stop Taylor from walking into oncoming traffic, she became combative. She kicked at the officers, resulting in charges of battery on a law enforcement officer and resisting arrest. As Taylor's mental state deteriorated, she developed an unusual fixation. She became obsessed with Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious serial killer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dahmer had taken the lives of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He had committed acts of dismemberment and worse. He had been sentenced to over 900 years in prison before losing his life at the hands of a fellow inmate in 1994. Taylor's interest in Dahmer went far beyond casual curiosity. Her cell phone contained over 24 searches related to the individual. The search terms were specific and disturbing. She had searched for Jeffrey Dahmer walking into court, all sexy. She had searched for Jeffrey Dahmer's butt. These were not the searches of someone conducting research. They were the searches of someone infatuated with a person who had committed terrible acts. On her phone, Taylor saved images of Jeffrey Dahmer. She took a selfie posing next to her phone, which displayed a photograph of young Jeffrey Dahmer. She kept these images accessible, returning to them regularly. The individual who had terrorized Wisconsin decades earlier had become a source of fascination for this troubled young woman. Taylor's social media posts during this period reflected her deteriorating mental state. In 2022, she wrote cryptic and violent statements. One post read, "Went off and told an addict I will never stop buying you dope, so I could sit back watch you pass on." Another post from January 2022 stated, "Double-crossed my loyalty. That is one thing you will never get back. Let us play." The messages hinted at anger and a willingness to cause harm. Meanwhile, Taylor's legal troubles continued. In late 2021, she led police on a high-speed chase through Green Bay, reaching speeds of 80 miles per hour in city limits. She was arrested and convicted of fleeing, eluding, and obstructing police. The court sentenced her to 3 months in jail and fitted her with a GPS ankle monitor upon release. Taylor was convicted on January 3, 2022. The ankle monitor was intended to track her movements and ensure she complied with the terms of her release. It was a standard precaution for someone with her history of fleeing from law enforcement. But Taylor had no intention of being tracked. She removed the GPS monitor from her ankle. The device that was supposed to keep tabs on her location was simply discarded. Taylor was now free to go wherever she wanted without supervision, free to reconnect with people from her past, free to seek out the high school boyfriend she had never fully let go of. By February 2022, Taylor Schabusiness was 24 years old. She was addicted to methamphetamine, off her psychiatric medications, grieving the losses of her mother and brother, separated from her infant son, and obsessed with a serial killer. Her marriage to Warren had deteriorated while he sat in federal prison. She was alone, unstable, and searching for connection. It was during this time that Taylor reached out to Shad Thirian. The boy she had dated at Bayport High School was now a man, still living in Green Bay, still kind and compassionate. Their paths had diverged after high school, but they had never completely lost touch. Now, with her life falling apart, Taylor turned back to someone familiar. She had no way of knowing that this reconnection would end in tragedy. And neither did Shad. To understand what happened in that basement on Stony Brook Lane, we must first understand the man whose life was taken there. Shad Thirian was more than just Taylor's high school boyfriend. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and a young man with his whole life ahead of him. Shadrach Thirian was born on September 7, 1997, in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He entered the world just 2 months before Taylor Coronado was born in Chicago. Their lives would intersect years later at Bayport High School, but in those early years, Shad knew nothing of the girl who would one day end his life. His parents were Tara Pakanich and Michael Thirian. They raised Shad in the Green Bay area, where generations of his family had lived and worked. Though his parents eventually separated, Both remained actively involved in his upbringing. Shad never lacked for love or support from either side of his family. Shad grew up with siblings who adored him. He had two sisters, Ava and Silivea, and a brother named Bo. The family was close-knit, gathering for holidays and spending time together whenever possible. Shad was the kind of brother who looked out for his siblings, who showed up when it mattered, who made people feel valued. Those who knew Shad consistently described him with the same words, kind and compassionate. He was the type of person who thought of others before himself. His family's accounts painted a picture of a young man who valued his relationships and treated people with genuine warmth. He had a gentle nature that drew people to him. We mentioned earlier that Shad and Taylor met at Bayport High School and dated for approximately 2 years. But their relationship was just one chapter in Shad's life, not the defining one. After they broke up, Shad moved forward. He graduated in 2015 and began building an adult life. Shad went to work in the family business alongside his father, Michael, and his grandfather. He also worked as a laborer for a local construction company, engaging in physical work that kept him active. These were honest jobs, and Shad approached them with the reliability his family had come to expect from him. He showed up, he worked hard, he earned his way. Outside of work, Shad pursued interests that reflected who he was. He loved the outdoors, spending time camping and fishing in Wisconsin's lakes and forests. He enjoyed hunting, a common tradition in the area passed down through generations. He liked playing games and listening to music with friends, but his greatest passion was woodworking. Shad was artistic in ways that surprised people who only knew him as a construction worker. He channeled that creativity into carving wood, producing pieces that his family treasured. The same hands that worked construction during the day created art in his spare time. It was a side of Shad that revealed depth beneath his easygoing exterior. By 2022, Shad was 24 years old, the same age as Taylor. He lived with his mother Tara Pakanich and her boyfriend Steve Hendricks at a house on Stony Brook Lane on the west side of Green Bay. The arrangement was common for young people in the area, a way to save money while still maintaining independence. Shad had his own space in the basement, contributed to the household, and came and went as he pleased. Like many young people, Shad had some minor trouble with the law. Court records showed charges for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest in 2021. These were relatively minor offenses, the kind that did not define a person or predict future behavior. Shad was not a criminal. He was simply a young man who had made some mistakes while figuring out adulthood. When Taylor Schabusiness reached out to reconnect in early 2022, Shad did not turn her away. The girl he had dated in high school had clearly changed. She had married, had a son, struggled with addiction. But Shad's compassionate nature meant he did not judge people for their struggles. He saw someone he had once cared about, someone who needed connection. They began spending time together again. It was not a full relationship, not like what they had shared in high school. Taylor was technically still married to Warren, though he remained in federal prison. What developed between Shad and Taylor was more casual, a physical connection between two people who shared history. Shad had no way of knowing that Taylor's mental state had deteriorated so severely. He had no way of knowing about her obsession with Jeffrey Dahmer or the violent thoughts that plagued her mind. Shad Therian was simply being himself, kind, accepting, willing to give someone a chance. That kindness would cost him everything. And the woman who would witness the aftermath of that kindness, the one who would carry the weight of discovery, was the same woman who had raised him with such love. His mother, Tara Pakanich. Tara Pakanich had watched her son grow into the man described in the previous chapter. She had been there for all of it. The first steps, the school years, the graduation from Bayport, the jobs alongside his father. The house on Stony Brook Lane was where Shad came home to, where he stored his woodworking projects, where he felt safe. Tara had made sure of that. She was a mother who loved her son deeply. Through his teenage years, through his first job, through all the ordinary milestones of life, Tara had been present. She had given Shad space to become an adult while keeping her door open. The basement was his domain, but the house was still home. Tara's boyfriend Steve Hendricks had become part of the household over the years. He and Tara had built a life together, sharing the responsibilities of maintaining the home and looking out for each other. Steve cared about Shad, too, viewing him as part of the family unit they had created. The three of them coexisted comfortably in the house on Green Bay's west side. Tara was aware that Taylor Schabusiness had re-entered Shad's life. She knew that her son had reconnected with his high school girlfriend. As a mother, Tara likely had concerns. She had known Taylor back when she dated Shad in high school, and she could see how dramatically Taylor had changed since those days. The bright-eyed teenager had become someone harder, someone who carried visible signs of a difficult life. But Shad was 24 years old now, an adult capable of making his own decisions. Tara could express concern, but she could not choose her son's friends or romantic partners. She trusted Shad's judgment even when that judgment led him to spend time with someone who made her uneasy. The house on Stony Brook Lane had a basement where Shad spent much of his time. It was his space within the home, a place where he could have privacy while still being close to his mother. Tara occasionally heard activity from downstairs, the sounds of her son going about his life. She trusted that he was safe in their own home. After all, what could possibly happen in a basement in Green Bay, Wisconsin? The answer to that question would come on the night of February 21st, 2022. That evening, Tara knew that Taylor had picked up Shad around 9:30. She saw them leave together, as she had seen before. Young people often went out at night, and there was nothing unusual about Shad going somewhere with a friend. Tara had no reason to think this night would be different from any other. Later that night, Shad and Taylor returned to the house. They went down to the basement. Tara and Steve were elsewhere in the house, giving Shad the privacy that any adult would expect. At some point during the night, Tara noticed Taylor coming upstairs. She assumed Taylor was just using the bathroom, as visitors often did. She thought nothing of it. Throughout the following day, February 22nd, Tara was aware that Shad and Taylor remained in the basement. Young people sometimes spent entire days together. Tara did not check on them, respecting her son's space and his right to entertain guests without interference. She went about her daily routine, unaware of what was happening directly below her feet, unaware that her son was already gone. On the night of February 22nd, Tara and Steve went to bed. The house was quiet. Tara had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. She fell asleep in her home, in the same house where her son was supposed to be, believing that when morning came, life would continue as it always had. But in the early morning hours of February 23rd, 2022, Tara was awakened by the sound of a door slamming. She checked the time. It was around 2:30 in the morning. She noticed that the basement light was on, its glow visible from upstairs. Concerned, Tara decided to check on her son. She walked toward the basement stairs, expecting to find Shad still down there, or perhaps see that he had left with Taylor. What Tara Pakanich found at the bottom of those stairs would destroy her world forever. What she discovered in her own basement would be something no mother should ever have to see. But before we reach that moment of discovery, we must return to the evening of February 21st. We must follow Taylor and Shad as they left the house on Stony Brook Lane, trace their movements through that night, and understand exactly what happened in the hours before Tara's world fell apart. It was February 21st, 2022, approximately 9:30 p.m. Taylor pulled up to the house on Stony Brook Lane in a gold Chrysler Town and Country minivan. Shad climbed into the vehicle, ready for what he thought would be an ordinary night out with the woman he had known since high school. They were joined by a friend, someone who would later become a witness in the case. The three of them drove to an apartment on Eastman Avenue in Green Bay. This apartment was apparently where Taylor was staying at the time. Once inside, they began using substances together. They smoked marijuana, passing it around as young people often do. After the friend left, Taylor and Shad continued using substances alone. They smoked methamphetamine together, inhaling the drug that Taylor had been addicted to for years. The meth entered their systems, altering their mental states and lowering their inhibitions. But they did not stop there. Taylor and Shad also injected trazodone. Trazodone is a prescription antidepressant, not typically injected. The combination of methamphetamine and trazodone created a dangerous mix of stimulant and sedative effects. Both Taylor and Shad were now heavily intoxicated on multiple substances. At some point during the night, Taylor and Shad returned to his mother's house on Stony Brook Lane. This was when Tara noticed them come back, when she saw them head down to the basement. She had no idea what state they were in. She had no idea how much they had consumed. She simply saw her son return home with a friend, the same way he had done many times before. The basement contained a mattress where Shad slept. It was a typical setup for a young man living with his mother. There was nothing unusual about the space itself. It was simply a basement bedroom, unremarkable in every way until it became the scene of unspeakable violence. Taylor and Shad began engaging in intimate activity. They practiced what Taylor described as breath restriction, a dangerous activity involving intentional limitation of airflow during intimacy. It was something they had done together in the past. On this night, they used metal chains. Taylor described them as similar to a dog choke collar. Shad put the chain around his own neck. Taylor was on top of him as he lay face down on the mattress. What had started as a night of substance use and intimacy was about to transform into something far worse. Taylor began pulling on the chain, restricting Shad's breathing. At first, this may have been what they intended. But Taylor did not stop when she should have. She kept pulling, kept choking, kept watching as Shad struggled beneath her. Something inside Taylor had broken, and she was about to cross a line from which there was no return. The kind, compassionate young man who had welcomed her back into his life was about to become her victim. Shad began to cough up blood. His body was fighting for air, struggling against the chain that was cutting off his oxygen. His face started changing color, turning purple from the lack of blood flow. Taylor watched this happen. Eventually, Taylor knew that Shad was gone. His face had turned completely purple. Blood had poured from his mouth. His body had stopped moving, stopped fighting, stopped breathing. The young man who had been her high school boyfriend, who had been kind and compassionate, who had enjoyed woodworking and spending time with his family, was no longer alive. But Taylor did not call for help. She did not attempt any kind of assistance. And what she did next would shock even the most experienced homicide investigators in Green Bay. As morning arrived on February 22, 2022, Taylor Schabusiness faced a problem. She had just taken a man's life in his mother's basement. The body was too large for her to move in one piece. She needed to do something with Shad Therian's remains before his mother discovered what had happened. Taylor went upstairs to the kitchen. She searched through the drawers until she found what she was looking for: knives. She selected several, including a bread knife with a serrated blade. Then she returned to the basement. The dismemberment took place on the mattress where Shad had passed. Taylor positioned his body and began cutting. Her first target was his head. She wanted the head, she told police. She really liked it and wanted to keep it. So she started there, separating his head from his body. To collect the blood, Taylor used a black 5-gallon bucket and a blue storage tote. She held the body over these containers as she cut, letting the blood drain into them. When the containers began to fill, she carried some of the blood to the basement shower drain and poured it down, washing away the evidence of what she had done. Taylor continued the process throughout the day. She cut off his limbs. She removed internal organs, pulling them from the body cavity and placing them in plastic bags. The basement that had been Shad's bedroom was now covered in blood and scattered remains. She placed body parts in various containers she found around the house. Some went into the blue storage tote. Others were stuffed into cardboard boxes, including a box that had once held a crock-pot slow cooker. She put remains in an Under Armour backpack and a designer bag. Every container she could find became a vessel for pieces of Shad's body. The head went into the black bucket. Taylor also placed other remains in the bucket alongside his head. She covered the bucket with a beach towel, as if hiding it from view would somehow make it disappear. Taylor's original plan, according to her confession, was to take all the body parts with her. She intended to remove every trace of Shad from his mother's basement, but she told police that she got lazy and paranoid. She ended up only taking some of the remains to her minivan, including one of Shad's legs and foot. At some point during the night of February 22nd or early morning of February 23rd, Taylor left the house on Stony Brook Lane. She drove away in the Gold Town and Country minivan, leaving behind most of Shad's body. She had forgotten the head. She later told detectives, "I cannot believe I left the head, though," she said, as if it were a minor oversight. When Taylor left that house, she slammed the door behind her. That sound, echoing through the quiet house in the early morning hours, woke Tara Pakanich from her sleep. Tara noticed the basement light was on. She had no way of knowing that her world was about to end. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on February 23, 2022, Tara Pakanich woke to the sound of a door closing. The sound had come from downstairs, near the basement where her son Shad had been spending time with Taylor Schabusiness. Tara noticed that the basement light was still on, its glow visible from where she stood. Concerned, Tara made her way toward the basement stairs. She wanted to check if Shad was still down there or if he had left with Taylor. As she descended the stairs, she saw that the basement appeared empty. No sign of Shad. No sign of Taylor. Just the light burning over an empty room. But as Tara turned to go back upstairs, something caught her attention. Near the bottom of the stairs sat a black bucket. It was a 5-gallon container, the kind found in any hardware store. The bucket was covered with a beach towel, as if someone had tried to conceal its contents. Tara found this strange. The bucket had not been there before. Tara approached the bucket. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was a mother's instinct that something was terribly wrong. Whatever the reason, she reached down and lifted the towel. What she saw in that bucket was something no parent should ever have to witness. Inside the black bucket was her son's severed head. Shad's face, the face she had watched grow from infancy to adulthood, stared back at her from inside a plastic container. Alongside it were other remains. Tara's screams woke Steve Hendricks. He rushed to her side and saw what she had discovered. The scene was beyond comprehension. This was not something that happened in real life. This was not something that happened in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But it had happened, and it had happened to their family. Steve immediately called 911. The time was approximately 3:37 a.m. When the dispatcher answered, Steve struggled to explain what they had found. The words seemed impossible to form. How do you tell someone that you have found a human head in a bucket in your basement? The 911 operator had difficulty believing what she was hearing. At one point during the call, she asked Tara if she was hallucinating. The discovery seemed too impossible to be real. But Tara was not hallucinating. The head in the bucket was not a dream or a substance-induced vision. It was the reality of what Taylor Schabusiness had done to her son. Police were dispatched to the house on Stony Brook Lane. The call had come in as a report of a body, but nothing could have prepared the responding officers for what they were about to find. Steve Hendricks later testified about that night. He said, "I woke up from a deep sleep, and I am just tripping out." She wakes up crying, telling me she found her son's head in a bucket. Yeah, it is a little disturbing. The first officers arrived within minutes. They entered the house and made their way to the basement. What they found there would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The scene was unlike anything Green Bay law enforcement had ever encountered. This was not a typical homicide. This was something far worse. Green Bay police officer Alex Wanish was among the first responders to arrive at the house on Stony Brook Lane. He and his partner descended the basement stairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The sight that greeted them was something they would never forget. The black bucket sat near the stairs, just as Tara had found it. The officers approached and confirmed what the 911 caller had reported. Inside the bucket was a human head, severed at the neck. The face was male. The bucket also contained other remains. This was real. This had actually happened in a residential basement in their city. Body camera footage from the officers captured their reactions. One officer, upon seeing the head, said, "Oh my God!" He called to his partner to come look at what he had found. The other officer approached and saw the same thing. Then he radioed for backup. "We have got quite a bit of blood down here," he reported to dispatch. As officers examined the basement, they found more evidence of what had occurred. The mattress where Shad had slept was soaked with dried blood. Blood marks appeared on the walls and floor. The scene indicated extreme violence, the kind that comes from cutting through a human body. Beyond the mattress, officers discovered additional body parts. A blue storage tote contained the upper portion of a torso. Inside the torso's chest cavity, a severed foot had been placed. The image was disturbing even to seasoned investigators. Someone had not only dismembered a body, but had arranged the pieces in a way that suggested something beyond ordinary violence. Plastic bags stuffed with organs were found scattered around the basement. Cardboard boxes contained additional remains. An Under Armour backpack held body parts. A designer bag had been repurposed for the same grim use. Every container in the basement seemed to hold pieces of what had once been a living person. The forensic team documented everything. They photographed the bucket and its contents. They collected blood samples from the mattress, the walls, the floor. They gathered the containers and bags and boxes that held the scattered remains. The crime scene processing would take hours. Among the items found in the basement were the weapons used in the dismemberment. A bread knife with a serrated blade bore traces of blood and tissue. Other kitchen knives were scattered around the scene. Taylor had used ordinary household implements to commit her extraordinary crime. Tara told police that Taylor Schabusiness was the last person seen with Shad. She provided a description of Taylor and mentioned the gold Chrysler Town and country minivan Taylor had been driving. Officers immediately began searching for both the vehicle and its owner. Investigators suspected that more body parts might be in the minivan. If Taylor had truly planned to remove all the remains from the house, she might have loaded some into her vehicle before leaving. Finding Taylor and that minivan became the immediate priority. The search for Green Bay's most wanted suspect had begun. Police found Taylor Schabusiness later that day at an apartment complex on Eastman Avenue. This was the same location where she and Shad had gone the night before to use substances. The gold Chrysler Town and country minivan was parked outside, confirming that they had found their suspect. When officers approached Taylor, they immediately noticed her appearance. Her clothes were covered in what appeared to be blood. Her hands also showed traces of the same substance. She had a cut on her left thumb. Scratches marked her arms, which she later claimed were self-inflicted. The physical evidence on her body told its own story. Before searching the minivan, officers questioned Taylor about what had happened. According to the criminal complaint, when detectives asked her what had occurred, she responded with, "That is a good question." She claimed she had blacked out during at least part of the events. But she did not deny that something terrible had taken place. Officers searched the town and country minivan. Inside, they found a crock-pot box. The box, meant for holding a kitchen appliance, had been repurposed for something else entirely. It contained additional body parts, including one of Shad's legs and foot. Taylor had not been lying when she said she took some remains with her. She just had not taken all of them. Taylor was placed under arrest and transported to the Green Bay Police Department for questioning. Detective Kevin Kempf and Detective David Graff would conduct the interviews. What Taylor told them over the following hours would provide the complete picture of what had happened in that basement. During the interrogation, Taylor sat in a yellow jumpsuit across from the detectives. Despite being high on methamphetamine at the time and potentially still under the influence during the interview, she spoke clearly and answered questions directly. Detective Graff later described her as quite frank in being able to answer questions. Taylor confessed to everything. She described taking Shad's life. She told the detectives how she had choked him with the chain, how she had watched his face turn purple, how she had seen the blood come from his mouth. She described her state of mind during those moments. She said she was already this far, so she kept going. And when asked how it felt, she said in a lower voice, "Yeah, I liked it." In a final remark that demonstrated her state of mind, Taylor told the detectives that police were going to have fun trying to find all of the organs. She seemed almost amused by the investigation that her crimes had triggered. The woman who had worshipped Jeffrey Dahmer had now committed her own version of his crimes. On March 1st, 2022, the Brown County District Attorney's Office formally charged Taylor Schabusiness with 3 felony counts. The charges reflected the gravity of what she had done to Shad Thirion in that basement on Stony Brook Lane. The first charge was first-degree intentional homicide. This is Wisconsin's equivalent of first-degree taking of life. The charge alleged that Taylor had intentionally caused the passing of Shad Thirion. Her own statements to police, describing how she continued choking him because she was already this far, supported the intentional nature of her actions. The second charge was mutilating a corpse. Wisconsin law prohibits the intentional mutilation, disfigurement, or dismemberment of remains. Taylor had done all three. She had used kitchen knives to cut Shad's body into pieces. She had removed his head, his limbs, and his internal organs. The charge carried a potential sentence of up to 10 years. The third charge was third-degree inappropriate contact. This charge stemmed from Taylor's admission that she had engaged in inappropriate acts with Shad's body after his passing. The defense would later challenge this charge, arguing that Shad was not a person at the time because he was already deceased. The judge rejected this argument. Taylor made her first court appearance via video link from the Brown County Jail. She appeared on screen with her arms crossed, showing little emotion or engagement with the proceedings. When Judge Thomas Walsh asked if she was actively listening, she responded minimally. Her demeanor suggested either defiance or disconnection from the reality of her situation. The judge set bail at $2 million cash. This was an extraordinarily high amount, reflecting the severity of the charges and the danger Taylor posed to the community. The prosecutor called the case one of the most serious offenses we have had in this county in some time. Taylor remained in custody, unable to post the bail. The defense team immediately began building their case. Attorney Quinn Jolly was assigned to represent Taylor. His strategy became clear when he filed a plea on September 1, 2022, not guilty by reason of insanity. Under Wisconsin law, this is known as not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The insanity defense would require Taylor to prove that at the time of the crimes she was suffering from a mental disease or defect that prevented her from appreciating the wrongfulness of her actions. If successful, she would be sent to a secure mental health facility rather than prison. The defense also filed motions to suppress Taylor's confession. They argued that she was under the influence of methamphetamine and trazodone when she spoke to police, and therefore her statements should not be admissible. If successful, this motion would have removed key evidence from the prosecution's case. Judge Walsh denied the motion to suppress. He ruled that despite Taylor's substance use, she had been capable of understanding the questions asked of her and had voluntarily provided her answers. On February 14, 2023, Valentine's Day, Taylor Schabusiness appeared in Brown County Circuit Court for a hearing related to her competency to stand trial. It was exactly 3 years since she had married Warren Szabo in 2020. This Valentine's Day would mark a very different kind of event. Defense attorney Quinn Jolly stood before Judge Thomas Walsh requesting that the trial date be pushed back. He wanted additional time for a defense expert to review Taylor's mental state and determine whether she was competent to participate in her own trial. It was a routine request for a case involving an insanity defense. Taylor sat at the defense table in handcuffs, listening as her attorney argued on her behalf. She had shown erratic behavior throughout her incarceration, but nothing could have prepared the courtroom for what happened next. Without warning, Taylor lunged at Quinn Jolly. A Brown County Sheriff's deputy reacted immediately, tackling Taylor before she could reach her attorney. The courtroom erupted in chaos as officers restrained her. The attack had been sudden and violent, caught on camera by media outlets covering the high-profile case. After Taylor was restrained and removed from the courtroom, a law enforcement officer could be heard telling her, "You went crazy on your attorney." Taylor remained agitated. The woman accused of taking a life and dismembering the body had just attacked the lawyer trying to save her from life in prison. Approximately 10 minutes after the attack, Quinn Jolly addressed the court. Despite what had just happened to him, he maintained his professional composure. But he told Judge Walsh that he planned to file a motion to be removed from the case. He could no longer represent a client who had physically assaulted him. The court granted Jolly's request, and attorney Christopher Froelich took over Taylor's defense on March 3, 2023. Froelich had an unusual connection to the case. He had previously represented Arturo Coronado's wife during their divorce proceedings after Arturo was accused of committing a crime against a minor. Now he would represent Arturo's daughter. Froelich immediately filed a motion asking Judge Walsh to recuse himself from the case. He argued that because Walsh had witnessed Taylor attack her previous attorney, he might be biased against her. The motion was denied. Walsh would remain the presiding judge for the trial. The defense also requested a second competency evaluation for Taylor. They argued that the evaluation conducted in November 2022 was now stale and that Taylor may have been suffering from a mental breakdown. The court ordered additional psychological examinations to determine whether she could proceed to trial. On July 21, 2023, jury selection began in the case of Wisconsin versus Taylor Schabusiness. Potential jurors were questioned about their knowledge of the case, which had made national and international headlines. Finding 12 people who could evaluate the evidence without preconceived notions proved challenging but was ultimately accomplished. The trial was structured in 2 phases. The first phase would determine whether Taylor was guilty of the charges: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree inappropriate contact. If the jury found her guilty, the second phase would address her mental state. This bifurcated approach is standard for Wisconsin insanity defenses. Opening statements began on Monday, July 24, 2023. Brown County District Attorney David Lacey presented the prosecution's case. He told the jury what the evidence would show: that Taylor Schabusiness had intentionally taken Shad Thirian's life, had committed inappropriate acts with his body, and had dismembered his remains. The evidence, he promised, would be clear. Defense attorney Christopher Froelich took a different approach. He reminded the jury that the defense did not have to prove anything. The burden of proof lay entirely with the prosecution. He asked the jurors to assess the credibility of each witness and to question whether Taylor's statements to police could be trusted given her substance use. The prosecution called its first witnesses. A staff member from the Brown County 911 Dispatch Center testified about the call that came in on February 23, 2022. The recording of Steve Hendricks and Tara Pakanich reporting the discovery was played for the jury. The confusion and horror in their voices filled the courtroom. Steve Hendricks himself took the stand. He described being awakened by Tara's screams. He described seeing the head in the bucket. His testimony brought the human element to the forefront. This was not just about evidence and legal arguments. This was about a family destroyed by violence. The jury was shown body camera footage from the responding officers. The video captured the moment police first saw the bucket and its contents. The officers' reactions, including the one who said, "Oh my God," demonstrated the shock that even trained professionals felt when confronted with Taylor's actions. Photographs of the crime scene were admitted as evidence. The jury saw images of the basement, the mattress covered in blood, the containers holding body parts. These images were difficult to view, but they were essential to proving the charges. The prosecution needed the jury to understand exactly what Taylor had done. Over the first day of testimony, 11 witnesses took the stand for the prosecution. Family members of the victim, Green Bay police officers, 911 dispatch personnel, and staff from the medical examiner's office all provided their accounts. The evidence was building, brick by brick, toward an inevitable conclusion. The trial would continue for 3 days, with the prosecution presenting a total of 28 witnesses. The defense chose not to call any witnesses during the first phase, relying instead on challenging the prosecution's evidence through cross-examination. Taylor herself exercised her right not to testify. She would remain silent as her fate was decided. On the third day of trial, the prosecution played Taylor Schabusiness's recorded confession for the jury. The video showed Taylor in a yellow jumpsuit, sitting across from Detective Kevin Kempf and Detective David Graff. Her demeanor was calm, almost casual, as she described what she had done to Shad Thirian. At one point in the recording, Taylor laughed as she described what she had done. The contrast between the horror of her actions and her apparent amusement disturbed everyone watching. This was not a woman consumed by remorse. This was someone who seemed entertained by her own crimes. Detective David Graff testified about his interviews with Taylor. He confirmed what the jury had seen in the recording. Taylor had been frank and open about what she had done. She answered questions without hesitation. She provided details that only the person responsible could know. The prosecution also presented evidence from Taylor's cell phone. The searches for Jeffrey Dahmer were shown to the jury. The selfie she had taken next to a photo of Dahmer just 11 days before taking Shad's life was displayed. The evidence suggested that Taylor's crime was not random, but was connected to her obsession with the serial individual. The medical examiner testified about the cause of passing. Shad Thirion had died from strangulation. The substances in his system, while present, had not contributed to his passing. It is my medical opinion that the substances did not have anything to do with the passing of Mr. Thirion, the examiner stated. Taylor's actions alone had ended his life. When the defense's turn came, Froelich chose not to call any witnesses. He relied on the strategy of challenging the prosecution's evidence through cross-examination. The jury would have to decide based on what they had seen and heard. Taylor Schabusiness remained silent throughout, watching as her own words condemned her. The jury retired to deliberate on the 3 charges: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree inappropriate contact. Based on the evidence they had seen over 3 days, they would decide whether Taylor Schabusiness was guilty. The deliberations lasted approximately 30 minutes. In less than half an hour, the 12 jurors had reached unanimous verdicts on all 3 counts. The speed of the deliberation suggested that the evidence had been overwhelming. The jury had no reasonable doubt about Taylor's guilt. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Thomas Walsh prepared to read the verdicts. Taylor Schabusiness sat at the defense table watching. Her demeanor throughout the trial had been detached, showing little emotion. This moment would be no different. On the charge of first-degree intentional homicide, guilty. On the charge of mutilating a corpse, guilty. On the charge of third-degree inappropriate contact, guilty. Taylor had been convicted on all counts. The jury had rejected any possibility of innocence. As the verdicts were read, Taylor's expression changed. She smirked, a hint of a smile crossing her face. Then she turned in her chair to face the jury. She stared at each juror as the judge asked them individually to confirm that the verdicts were true and correct. Her gaze was confrontational, unsettling. But the trial was not over. Because Taylor had pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, the jury would now move to the second phase. They would hear evidence about her mental state at the time of the crimes. If they found she was suffering from a mental illness that prevented her from understanding right from wrong, she could be sent to a psychiatric facility instead of prison. Defense attorney Froelich spoke to the media after the verdict. He said Taylor had shown no reaction when the verdicts were read. She understood what had happened, but she did not respond emotionally. Whether this was evidence of mental illness or simply indifference to her fate, only the second phase of the trial would help determine. The first phase of Taylor Schabusiness's trial had concluded with convictions on all counts. Now the jury would decide whether those convictions would send her to prison or to a mental hospital. The answer would come the following day. The jury deliberated on the question of Taylor's mental state. Had she been suffering from a mental disease or defect at the time of the crimes? Did that condition prevent her from appreciating the wrongfulness of her actions? These were the questions they had to answer. The deliberations lasted less than 1 hour. Once again, the speed suggested that the jury had found the evidence clear. They returned to the courtroom with their verdict. The defendant did not have a mental disease or mental defect at the time the crimes were committed. The jury had rejected Taylor's insanity defense. They found that despite her documented mental health history, despite the claims of bipolar disorder and psychosis, Taylor Schabusiness knew what she was doing when she took Shad Thirion's life. She understood that it was wrong. She simply did not care. After hearing from all sides, Judge Thomas Walsh asked Taylor Schabusiness if she had anything to say before he imposed her sentence. This was her opportunity to express remorse, to apologize to the Thirion family, to explain herself in her own words. The courtroom waited. Taylor's response was brief. "No, there is not," she said. After hours of testimony about her life, her trauma, her crimes, she had nothing to add. She would not apologize to Shad's family. She would not express regret for what she had done. She simply declined to speak. Judge Walsh then delivered his ruling. He addressed Taylor directly, speaking about the nature of her crimes. "This crime offends human decency," he said. "It offends human dignity. It offends the human community. It really does." He noted that there were no superlatives adequate to describe what she had done. Judge Walsh eventually sentenced Taylor to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the first-degree intentional homicide conviction. In addition, Walsh imposed 10 years consecutive for mutilating a corpse and 6 months consecutive for third-degree inappropriate contact. The total sentence, life plus 10.5 years. Taylor Schabusiness would spend the rest of her days in prison. There would be no parole hearing, no chance at early release, no possibility of ever returning to society. She was 25 years old. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars for what she had done to Shad Thirion. The Thirion family left the courtroom quickly after the sentence was announced. They had gotten the outcome they wanted. Taylor would never be free again. But no sentence could bring Shad back. No punishment could undo what had been done to him in that basement. Taylor was transported to Taycheedah Correctional Institution, a women's prison in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. This would be her home for the rest of her life. One of the most violent crimes in Green Bay's history had been resolved, but the story of Taylor Schabusiness was not quite over. Taylor Schabusiness arrived at Taycheedah Correctional Institution to begin her life sentence. The prison, located about an hour south of Green Bay, would be the place where she would grow old and eventually pass. She had entered the system at 25. She would never leave. Her defense attorney, Christopher Froelich, indicated that he planned to file an appeal. The appeal process would examine whether errors had been made during the trial that warranted a new proceeding. However, given the strength of the evidence against Taylor, including her own detailed confession, the chances of success were slim. Taylor Schabusiness will spend the rest of her life at Taycheedah Correctional Institution. She has no possibility of parole. She has no chance of release. She will grow old behind bars, remembered only as the woman who took the life of a young man who had once been her high school sweetheart. The story of Taylor Schabusiness is a story without redemption, without hope, and without a happy ending for anyone involved. If you love what we do, kindly subscribe and turn on notification.